We've been having a great conversation with Eldar Shafir, who is a Princeton professor and a behavioral scientist. I choose to say that he's probably also a behavioral economist, because it's kind of the same thing. Maybe not. Either way, his book, Scarcity, The New Science of Having Less and How It Defines Our Lives, he wrote it with Sendhil Mullainathan. And it is a funny, an excellent book. But I think what's fascinating, and you, Hunter, you basically said it's the best book you've read.
Yeah, I think it's the single best critique of Homo Economicus. Like, there's this assumption that's built into a lot of economics, and particularly neoliberal economics, that is that, you know, humans behave as rational actors. And what scarcity, like, if, you know, people, you start to critique that and they're like, "Ugh," and then I would, you know, what I want is to just be able to have a copy of Scarcity in my hand and just be like, boom, read this, and then tell me that humans are rational actors.
Yeah, because it's really about the fact that when you have an empty belly or nowhere to live, it is going to change your behavior. My buddy Brett Ernst, who's a comic, said, "You're a rational guy, huh? Good guy. Miss a night of sleep and 2 meals. Come and talk to me. Let's see what happens." Because you want to fix that problem now. You don't want to you're not interested in theory. You want to fix it now. It's exactly like if there's an army, if there's a band of thugs over the hill that want to come in and take everything you have and enslave your children. I'm not interested in an article written for the New York Times. I want a gun, and I want to know how to shoot it, you know? So anyway, welcome. With that having said, welcome, Professor.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome, and
Thank you.
And thank you for your work.
So what prompted you to write this book and to devote so much of your life researching this topic?
Well, I mean, if you really want to know the story, it's kind of funny. I mean, Sendhil and I were good friends. I was doing work on mostly on decision making, a lot of it in the lab on folks, a lot of it sort of behavioral economic critique of inconsistency in decision making, that kind of thing. Sendhil was doing lots of wonderful work in developing countries, mostly developmental economics. And I remember distinctly a lunch we had where we were talking about the fact that I was looking at decision making, he was looking at poverty, but nobody was looking at the combination of, you know, decision making in the context of the poor. And so we decided to do a little study. We had very different plans in mind at the time. We thought that we were going to show that, you know, the poor basically, which is what any behavioral scientist would think, are just like everybody else, same head, same thinking, and the kind of biases that we see with, quote, regular folks, we'll see with people, you know, who live in contexts of insufficient resources. So we did a couple of small studies thinking that would be all of it, and then we started getting into some data and some thinking that suggested that maybe there's something special going on. There's something characterized as the context of the poor that's different from the context that we inhabit every day, and that sort of yields its own psychology. So it came about slowly.
Yeah, well, it always takes a lot of slow thinking to do this sort of stuff. And I think the other thing that, you know, Bryan and I were talking about before the podcast started is it is staggering how many behavioral scientists and behavioral economists are Israeli. Like, you've got, you know, Kahneman, you've got Tversky,
we talk about that. Yeah.
Daniel Ariely, and then, of course, yourself. Why is that? I mean, I think, yeah, I would just love to hear your thoughts on that.
You know, I don't have any deep theory. I mean, some people say it's because, you know, we live through times when it's a very salient issue, or we're making the wrong decisions, the right decisions. But I think a lot of other people are living through similar times. You know, in my case, it's literally Amos Tversky. So I think this is a young enough generation. I think a lot of them were just influenced by a couple of very salient, successful, very appealing, smart, interesting academics. In my case, I was doing very different work in graduate school, and Amos came to give a couple of talks, and I heard it and said, that's what I want to do. Very clear. And I wrote and met him and decided I want to come work with him.
And
I didn't have to be Israeli. It was almost by chance.
But you did have the opportunity to work directly with the founder of the field, and that does have a real impression on you.
And he was not just any founder. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. I mean, smart, funny. It was great.
Yeah. And so, you know, I mean, from those early days of, you know, just sort of starting to undermine rational agent theory to, you know, I mean, this is a really pointed critique, which just makes it clear that decision making really depends on emotional and depends on your circumstances, and that we don't all live in the same circumstances. At this point, shouldn't we all be acknowledging that Homo economicus, while it's a sort of pretty idea in the abstract, that just doesn't bear any real correlation to the on-the-ground reality?
You know, I never see it as a competition. I think there's certain insights, certain important ideas in classical and Homo economics, which are useful and important, and we learn from. So I see it more as a joint project. I think there's certain things that we cannot do. We don't have the aesthetics, the sort of results that they can get from equilibria that they produce that are very insightful. So there's things that they have that we don't. But I think at the end of the day, yeah, I think a lot of people acknowledge today that where you want to go is some sophisticated combination of the different insights and different perspectives that gives you something new. In a sense, it's interesting for me to hear you talk about the critique of Homo economicus, because Sendhil and I, in some sense, as opposed to a lot of stuff that came before, we didn't even
Lost you for a second.
About their disciplines. So in a funny way,
we lost you for a second. Could you start that answer again?
I was saying that it's interesting to hear you talk about the fact that this feels like such a compelling critique of Homo economicus, because in some way, Sendhil and I went into this not even so much with the agenda of critiquing economics. We just wanted to get a better sense of the decision-making of people living in poverty.
There was no political agenda. That's always the best.
Or even an academic agenda. Some of the early critiques of behavioral economics really focused on the assumptions of economics, the axioms, and how we might show that they're violated. Sendhil and I just wanted to know very empirically, what is it that's happening in context of insufficient resources? Now, you're right that the outcome, the results, the explanation, violates certain very specific assumptions and creates results that are not what you'd expect from standard thinking. But it was almost not the intention. In a way, that's kind of a victory. I mean, we're past the debate, past the attempt to show each other wrong, and just going ahead saying, okay, now that we know, what can we find that's empirically useful?
Talk about a little bit about the kinds of scarcity we're saying. There's time, there's money. Time I hadn't even thought about. I don't know why until.
There's a reason for it. I mean, when we look at the hunger studies, that whole thing we describe about the guys going through starvation in the hunger experiments and, during the Second World War. Even if you don't know those studies, which in itself, by the way, if you're interested in academic sort of trivia, it's interesting because none of my colleagues have ever heard of this study. And if you go to any conference in nutrition, it's the number one study they all know.
Can you talk a little bit about it for our listeners?
Yeah, this is a study that we came across, through a friend when we were writing the book. It's basically the Allied forces around 1942-43 realized that they're going to inherit a lot of hungry people in European camps, and that they didn't know how to feed them. Feeding the hungry is a little bit like coming down from mountain climbing. It's not a trivial task. So they assigned this guy Ancel Keys, a nutrition expert in Minnesota, the task of studying how to feed the starving. And of course, to do that, he had to starve people. So he got a bunch of very, very impressive, educated, healthy, young, conscientious objectors who were eager to contribute to the war effort and starved them, not to death, but to massive discomfort. And, in the book, we describe how, they didn't have enough energy, strength to hold their hands above their heads long enough to wash their hair. But we were more interested in the psychological part and what comes out if you read. Ancel Keys was less interested in that, but it's all in the transcripts and in the documents. How these guys are highly educated, highly sophisticated, not particularly invested in thinking about food since they don't have any. Nonetheless, that's all they can think about. They plan to open restaurants. They memorize recipes. It's almost comical.
Yeah.
When somebody feels sorry for them and shows them the movie, they say, I didn't care about the love scenes. I wanted to see the food. So it becomes like, that's where your mind is.
And Gary Taubes in his book, two very good books. One is Good Calories, Bad Calories, and the other is Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It. Paints Ancel Keys as the chief boogeyman in sort of ushering the idea of eating a low-fat, high-fiber diet, which caused a great deal of obesity because it spikes your insulin. And he was a very charismatic guy, but he did this shoddy study, I think, on 7 continents and looked at cholesterol levels and Indian mill workers and people who ate primarily sort of a high-fiber, low-fat diet and drew from that the idea that animal fat is bad for you, and so we should reduce that. Yeah. And he does a really good job of kind of tracing the entire genealogy behind this. And Ansel Keys, in many ways, is responsible for the obesity epidemic. He had some bad ideas about nutrition. So who knows if they were influenced by that study.
Yeah, see, I was focusing on the mental. I was skipping all the physical, but there you go.
Well, yeah, because you know, again,
dangers of specialization.
Well, because again, you know, when we don't live, and when you're talking about insulin production and eating too much, that's not a problem of scarcity.
Absolutely.
You know, you're really, and it's very easy to think of your set point as one in which you have plenty to eat, you live under representative government. You have the time to see a movie, hug your kids, whatever it might be. And I think that your book is so important because so much of why people behave the way they do, and I think you could probably blame the Trump revolution on this. People don't have enough food. I mean, they don't have enough money. They have $400 in the bank. That's a problem, man. That is a major issue. And if you think it's not going to affect how people behave, I mean, you know, I think it was somebody said Trump was, you know, it may be so that most Trump supporters don't really like Trump as a person, but he was an excellent murder weapon. You know, it's a good way of looking at it, man. If you rob people of their dignity and you get a guy out there blaming globalism and everything else, there's a kernel to truth to everything. So I think it's relevant, very relevant.
I mean, you know, I assume we're not going to go into politics here, but to be fair, whatever we think about Trump, one reason we have Trump is that a lot of us have been doing this for a very long time in this country. So there is a segment of the population that's not been living very well for a very long time in a nation that, you know, unlike the Netherlands or for the matter even Italy, doesn't have this social support system that you wish we would provide. So, but I'm with you. And, you know, of course, back to Keys, there are, of course, a lot of calorie and other food problems among the poor because, of course, when you don't have very much money, one way you use it is to get foods that are very satisfying. And those are often high calorie, low nutrition foods that just make you feel satisfied, but not always terribly good for you.
Right. Well, and that's the core finding of scarcity about this psychological state is that it's very short term. And it's very much focused on solving whatever the immediate problem is. It's crisis thinking.
Yep, exactly. And you know, in a sense, what I find very appealing is that we often think of myopia of, you know, discounting the future as a personality trait, and what we're seeing here is it's a trait of the situation you're in. And you could be very thoughtful and very high in self-control until I put you in a situation where something is burning and urgent, and all of a sudden you act very differently. And
also we think of myopia as bad. And the point is that myopia, I mean, what your book draws out so well is myopia is highly adaptive. Like if you're in an environment where...
In the short term, at least.
In the short term, because the point is we should be doing whatever it is to get out of that crisis. The problem is that the environment that we've created in our society puts people in myopia for decades. And so they never have the ability, like there's, you know, all the conversation about pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Well, if you're just in constant crisis management mode, you know, you don't have the attentional space to be able to do that sort of long-term thinking.
Well, especially when you've played by the rules and other people haven't, and you've been left by the wayside. When you've been waiting in line and doing the things that when you've entered the social contract in good faith and held up your end, and you're paying for other people who have not done that, it's very easy to see why you'd be downright violent towards them. You know? And, you know, one thing I think where the two of you are connecting is that one place where we can have an impact, we policymakers, is that even if you get to this myopic state where there's an urgency, do we let you get out of it? And if you take a payday loan or you committed petty crime and end up with a very long prison system record, instead of helping you get out, we sink you further in. This is a huge thing to talk about. You talk about payday loans. I want to talk about that, and I want you to unpack that for us. I have direct experience from some friends, especially the guy I tour with who did 5 years for drug trafficking. He was selling weed and taking it over the border from Canada, and he was young, 21, and he did 5 years. he cannot get. It's a good thing he's doing stand up. He can't. His options, and I'm not kidding, are stand up comedy or crime. You're not doing anything else. You're done. You can't drive Uber. You're done. And then so that's for sure. Once you commit a crime, even breaking in to a car when you're drunk and stealing a laptop, if you get hit with a felony, you're done. You're not working at Costco. You're not working at Walmart. You're not getting a job anywhere because especially with corporations, especially when you have these monoliths, these corporations, they don't want to take a chance. They don't have to take a chance. They just go, sorry. You're just part of you're a number. You're part of an algorithm. We'd rather err on the side of caution. So huge problem there.
I think even when you say they don't want to take a chance, it's interesting to me because I think part of it comes from not getting it. In other words, I think a lot of these corporations who do not give their workers the minimally acceptable working conditions and give them, schedules that are not known in advance and don't forgive all kinds of petty transgressions in the past, they're losing good workers. In other words, it's not if they understand.
You froze up for a second.
What's striking is if you look at. Are we back?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
One thing that's so striking to me, if you look, for example, at big fast food chains who tell their workers 15 minutes in advance when they're going to work tonight and tomorrow and have them on ready 24 hours a day, which ends up being very difficult for single mothers and have childcare problems and transportation problems and are juggling. What these people don't understand, the bosses, is that if they gave the workers a 2-week schedule, which is doable, they just have people who work better, who sleep better, who are less worried, or juggling less. So it's not an altruistic act; it's a self-serving act for McDonald's if they understood the story.
Sure. And
I think it's the same with crime. I mean, you go to Scandinavia, they take people who've committed serious crime, and after 10 years, give them a full chance to rehabilitate. And they get wonderful citizens who have, had 10 years to think about it and regret it and study and prepare and go back. Whereas we just keep people, humiliated at high cost, way beyond what's needed. So it's a self-defeating misunderstanding.
And I think, firstly, that's the real spirit of what Adam Smith was talking about in The Wealth of Nations, because we should be speaking to people's self-interest. So even as we talk to people who aren't living in scarcity, we should be helping them to see how they're acting not in their own self-interest by having the system set up this way. And this has deep personal relevance for me because this morning I came down to find that my car had been broken into. Somebody smashed my back window.
Bastards! Bastards, lock them up!
Well, but the point is that obviously that's a problem for me. Obviously, I'm now going to have to pay for a car window. But, ultimately, I understand that there's a system that's not working for a lot of people. And, if we could find that person, sit them down, have a conversation with them,
they're probably a junkie, brother.
Well,
but I hear you. I know what you're saying.
But, and ultimately this Mark Blythe, who we had on the podcast, he said the Hamptons is not a defensible position. And that is really the key is, okay, even if you have a fairly good life, if you don't have a system that's working for everyone, then you're going to suffer the consequences of that. And if you go to places with real inequality like South Africa, you have to deal with, far worse things than having your car window broken.
Yeah,
that's true. So we were talking, though, for a second, and good points
about
there.
Payday loans.
Payday loans. I wanted you to unpack that. So I definitely agree that we have to do something about what we do with our prisoners. And Obama tried to do something. I remember there was this idea that you could expunge something on your record after a certain period of time if you'd been good, which makes sense to me because if you're going to brand somebody a scarlet letter and they can never get a job, that is not good for any of us. It is not good for any of us. Because really what you're saying is when you got drunk and you were 21 and you broke into that car and stole that laptop, which is what happened to my friend's brother, you're condemned for the rest of your life. You are condemned to a life of destitution and poverty. Is that what we really are? Is that what you really want? Is that what we really want? So you're never allowed to make a mistake? I think it's ridiculous.
Well, and then also, what do those people end up doing? More crime.
Exactly. Or they kill themselves, or they become drug addicts, or whatever it is. Either way, we all pay for it. So if you don't have compassion, which you should, then you should have rational. You should understand it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. And now you got payday loans. So people are putting themselves into debt.
which Obama, of course, tried as well. The CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, was working very hard at everything from ranging from legal lawsuits to other methods to at least cap the interest rates that were imposed on loans. But those lawsuits have, in recent weeks, literally been dropped and just dismissed.
Why is that?
They're erasing the CFPB. They're going out of the way to cancel any power, any access that CFPB had before. They're just going to destroy it now.
Is that because of the lobbying efforts of?
I think Trump himself and all his buddies find consumer protection an unappealing prospect.
Wow.
Literally. I mean, I don't think there's even pretense there. I mean, I think other places they might say something else.
Because it's regulatory, it's anti-business, all that shit.
Yeah, totally.
Well, then the onus lies on us as citizens to figure out a way to not get ourselves in debt. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, but the problem is that, like, again, like it's one thing for us with full belly thinking to talk about this.
Yeah,
thing,
you're right.
But
Good
like
point.
these, so many of our citizens don't have the luxury of sort of evaluating financial options because they're in this scarcity mindset. And
especially when payday loans are the only thing available.
That's right.
Immediately. So talk to us about payday loans
and how they work.
So payday loans basically are, you have to be working poor. You have to be working to be able to have a payday. So this is actually limited to the working poor. And you basically, you fail to smooth the month, or there is an emergency. You find yourself with some urgent need for money that you don't have. You need, $200. And where are you going to get it? You go to a payday loan provider. You take a $200 payday loan when you provide, a post-dated check that you paid back. Defaulting rates are very low. And you borrowed $200 now, and you owe me $240 in 2 weeks, and that's it. And of course, if you didn't have $200 now, how are you going to have $240 next time? So unless you won the lottery in the meantime, it's harder to have $240 next time than it was $200 this time. What do? You take a payday loan to pay it back. So the data is that people who take payday loans end up averaging 10 to 15 a year. Some statistics suggest that if you look at a random payday loan given in the U.S. today, sometimes up to 70% of it goes to pay the previous one. So it just turned you into a money pup at high cost. And so this initial glitch where there was a genuine need, you're working, you have money, but there was a need that exceeded your ability at the moment.
So what do we do about that? I mean, so payday loans are a marketplace way of providing. If not payday loans, it's going to be loan sharks.
Well, those are the same thing. I mean, one thing is to cap it. So to say, what's the minimum I can charge? My dream one day is that the Gates Foundation open a payday loan provider next to every payday loan provider and just charges the least interest possible, which it won't be zero, but be much less.
Great idea.
And if you look at it, I have a lot of problems with Judaism, but one thing they do extremely well is this: you go to the rabbi anytime, and you explain to him why you need $150, and you get it interest-free, and you pay it back when you can. And early studies compute that makes sense. It's like doubling your income.
Wow!
Because at the end of the day, you are able to jump those difficult moments at no cost, which leads you to lead a much simpler, happier, better life. So, yes, I mean, how to solve the problem is. By the way, another way to solve it is that a lot of people who take payday loans, they're not inherently poor. They just don't have money right now. So the question is, how do you smooth that?
Right.
Think about it. I'm working for you, and week 3, I'm out of money. In some funny way, you owe me 3 weeks of work already. When I don't have money, I stand to get 3 weeks of work I've already done for you. So I actually have the money. You just haven't given it to me yet.
Yeah.
And now I have to go borrow. So you can imagine designing systems where I get paid weekly instead of monthly, giving me access at low interest. There are ways to design a way that those who are already working for money would encounter these needs less often, and when they do, they'll get hurt less when they have to get over it.
Have you reached out to the Gates Foundation about that idea?
Not directly, but indirectly. It's a pain. It's complicated. I don't even know how much it would cost. But you can see why it's tempting to think about it anyway.
Well, and even potentially, even if it's the physical location that's problematic, right? With things like, phones, the ability to even if people can't afford smartphones, there's been such a revolution in texting, banking, SMS banking. So there must be systems that are possible there. But I think actually the idea of simply paying people weekly instead of monthly is a really, really simple, easy idea.
Well, it's not a simple, easy idea because corporations and companies have their reasons for why they do that. We'd probably get into a different.
Well,
debate
maybe
there.
it's just a legacy assumption based on having deposit checks. I mean, maybe with direct deposit, you could do it much more seamlessly now.
Maybe, yeah. Technology
There are
definitely has
some
a way of doing this.
young guys, smart guys who are looking for interesting apps, and I've seen a couple. One, for example, is based on the idea that you join my app, and we spend 6 months gauging what is your average weekly income or monthly income, and from that moment on, I guarantee you that income every month. When you make more, I store it. When you make less, I give it to you. And so if you're a member of my app, from that moment on, you're going to get exactly 460 every month, which makes life a lot better than getting 600 one month and 200 the next.
And
also the
example that you give in the book about unsmooth income that is so great is farmers, particularly in India. So could you lay out what that looks like?
So, in the most extreme case, these are the farmers that we used for some of our studies. The most extreme case, almost by definition, is they get most of their income literally in one day. And so in the case of sugarcane farmers in India, these people we ran, these are people for whom at least 65% of their annual income comes in one day, when they sell the sugar to the refinery. And, unless you
have connection,
smooth the harvest, and you fail to smooth fully, and you end up being poor before the harvest because you run out too quickly. Because, you're not living in great luxury. You're living, at the end of the day, modestly, but you don't exactly allocate it beautifully throughout the year.
Yeah.
And so, yes, this is the most extreme case of people who are experienced, and even without natural disasters or anything else, you basically end up not living the same life in the beginning as opposed to the end of the season, just like food stamp recipients and others who will run out too quickly.
What do you think of some of these companies like Quora or, there's certain companies that'll give you a loan, no questions asked. I can't remember what it is, but you can get up to $2,000 or $3,500. And they've sponsored my other podcast a couple of times. And do you know anything about those?
You mean without interest?
It's a minimal interest. Right.
That would be great. I don't know about Quora.
There are these new companies that are doing this, that are getting they do have access to your bank account though, I guess, and they can kind of garner your wages as you but there's small sort of micro loans that seem to be
I think if it's done without predatory intentions and it helps you smooth, it's probably worth looking into.
It's the predatory intentions that are a problem. Do we know who? Yeah. There's always going to be people. Are these big companies that are doing this, or is it just a lot of different people?
Maybe we don't want to name names, but some of the biggest banks that you would list on your top 5 in the U.S. make ginormous amounts of money out of payday lenders.
Jesus.
They don't put their name on the marquee. It says, somebody, but it's owned by the biggest banks. And I think in the book we have some statistics. There was enormous amount of money.
It's like student loans too. All these things that just don't really help us. They don't.
Well, and the key thing is that, it's funny, like I didn't mean to set this up this way, but the podcast that we had just before this was Ganesh Siddharaman, who wrote The Crisis of the Middle Class Constitution. And so very much parallel to this, which is that in order to have a functional and healthy democracy, you need this broad middle class, and you need a system that ultimately provides people with the attentional space to be able to, pay attention to what their politicians are doing and really hold them accountable. And, I think that, for us, like these ideas now all exist. Like there's your book, there's Ganesh's, and now it's time to really put these ideas and start to build a movement to take some real action.
What is that action? What's that action though? Besides Bill Gates?
It depends. It depends what you do in life and how you can contribute. What fascinates me in a lot of this stuff is that a lot of it can be explained not through malice, but just through naivete, through misunderstanding. So I'm not arguing there's no malicious people. There's a lot of them. But let's assume we can't work on the evil for now. We don't know how to do that. If we could just work on the well-intentioned, as we were saying before, if they understood the harm they're doing to us, to themselves, and how much better they could get society to look if they did the right stuff, I think we can go a long way. And that, to me, in some sense, is the most fascinating part. I mean, look, this is a profoundly Christian nation. It's acting so un-Christian in so many of the things it does. That's just strange. I think if people who care about this stuff saw how what they're doing is the wrong way to do it, I think they do it otherwise. So I think part of it is really just a lack of understanding of what motivates people. I think you look at a poor person in America today, they don't look too good, they don't speak too good, they are late, they forget, and they say they don't give a damn. And that's just wrong. I mean, we know they can care enormously, and it's just hard to be on time and not to forget, and to be clean and well-dressed when you haven't slept in a home. So that misunderstanding, the attribution that people make to what people are like, how capable they might be, how much they care from what they see, that's a disaster. And, it's throughout the social sciences, we know this.
Well, that's why your book is so important, and people like you are important because of what you're doing. And that's why we do this podcast, to get those ideas that are in that book, like Scarcity, out of that book and into the minds of people who are listening. Because, the only thing that matters is moving the right ideas so that they beat the bad ideas. Otherwise, we lost it. It's always this way. It just seems like that's the battle place. What is the best idea? Forget your goddamn lineage and your your party affiliation and what your dad taught you. What's the best idea? The evidence is here. We have a behavioral scientist who can show you a couple of examples, right? This is where people like you are very important. So, okay, we have some pretty strong empirical data to suggest that when you are living in scarcity, when you don't have a home, the time, you don't know when you're going to get paid a lot less, when your boss is going to want you to work a double, it's very difficult to not only have any consistency, but it's also not a good idea because we all pay for it in one way or another. Yep.
You say forget your lineage, but let's not forget it for a minute. Let's look back at what we've learned. Listen to the president talk about Mexicans today. We were joking earlier, look at the Sicilians, look at the Irish. I mean, they were the Mexicans of the U.S. 100 years ago.
That's right.
It's the same people are now distinguished and successful and running nations.
Mm-hmm.
You have all the evidence you need.
Exactly.
You give people the right context and they thrive. You make them feel like crap and they look like crap.
That's right.
I mean, we have the data.
That's exactly right.
But it's not intuitive, and somehow the story in this country right now, much more than in Europe, apropos. So if you ask the Dutch, take somebody who's poor, take somebody who's in prison, how much is it their fault, how much is it luck? They recognize that a lot of it, there but for the grace of God, it could have been me. In the U.S.
What's his name? Robert Sapolsky has done a lot of work on the idea that, and there are a lot of other people who have done this, but cognitive scientists, behavioral scientists, neuroscientists, talking about when you grow up in poverty, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the prefrontal cortex doesn't develop completely. So your impulses and your ability to make decisions aren't necessarily as good. Certainly if you've grown up under trauma, violence, lack of nutrition, there are 1,000 things.
That's right, but that's taking it in a different direction. I'm because a lot of our studies, if you think about it, it's the same person who we show functions less well or better when they have more or less scarcity. So, the Indian farmers, it's the same brain, it's the same growth. So I'm not disputing Sapolsky, of course, but keeping that constant, it's still the case. However you grew up, giving you a context that's designed to make you thrive just gets you to do a lot better than putting a context that's, full of landmines like payday loans.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some sense, that's the other lesson, is keep the person context. You can get constant and get so much more out of them if you put them in a situation that's designed to help them.
Yep.
And that's where I think we as a country at the moment are very weak. I mean, instead of help, it's kind of remarkable if you think about it, the amount of help that we get, and by that I mean, the classes who are living well in the U.S. today, your accountant, your lawyer, your gardener, your driver, your nanny, your reminder systems, your Skype and your computer, all these things are so helpful to manage everyday life. And then if you look at those who need that more, those who are juggling with much greater difficulty, they're getting so much less of that help. When they finally find a lawyer, it's a lawyer who cheats them. It's remarkable. So we're not designing a system that helps those who need it most, them trip, and design a system that makes our lives easier and easier.
Well, I think we get caught up, though, now on ideology. So when you start talking about helping those people that need the help the most, do we get into a landmine? Because what happens is we break into these teams. And so, well, what are you talking about? A government handout? No. Or maybe not.
Right.
Maybe there's a better way to think about it. You want to raise taxes on the people that are producing and give it, who's going to redistribute the wealth? You elites in Washington. This is the way I used to talk a lot. And so you find yourself clinging to your ideology.
But I think that's not separate from understanding, because some of the people who say this is a handout are the people who yesterday on Sunday were at church and are totally happy and predisposed to help the deserving poor. I believe they are, but they think that these guys are undeserving.
Yeah. Well, I think also there's some history there, though, Professor, which is that when we do raise taxes or when we redistribute income or when we do create a program, it doesn't do what it set out to do. So a lot of it is cynicism. And it's probably well-placed cynicism in the role of government and its ability to actually make a difference. So there are, that's where we have to, that seems to be where you have to win the debate, and there's got to be a way. There are certain things you have to be careful about using, words like confiscate, words like tax, words like program. All of a sudden,
people get triggered, and they're thinking emotionally rather than being reflective.
Right. Of course,
that's right.
And what we want to encourage is that slow thinking. And I think
even academics. What do you mean the academic? The guy from Princeton, the professor, the left wing Israelite. I can just see it all. It's like they stop listening immediately. He's a Marxist.
Say it again. I missed it.
I said, just when people do that stuff, they'll brand you immediately. He's an academic. He doesn't live in the real world. Lives in a world of theory. He's an Israelite. He's a behavioral scientist. He's a left wing. Whatever it might be.
That's right. No, but I agree with you. That's the emotional part. But if we talk seriously, and you say in the past these systems have failed, let's think about that. You're reminding me of, I don't know if you saw the recent headline in the Onion after the shooting, the last school shooting, and the Onion said, the only country that has this problem concludes that it cannot be avoided. I mean, you can't do that. I mean, we know that that wealth transfer and social support systems work. It's not like you're inventing something you tried and it didn't work. I mean, there's a lot of other countries in the world, where you come from, they work better.
Yeah.
So now, of course, there's difficulties. Sometimes things fail, but the idea that taxation and social welfare doesn't work. We know it does.
I'm trying to figure out a way to, because I can just hear people right now. If you use Scandinavia as an example, you're going to be in trouble because it's a socialist country, and people go, they don't produce as much as we do. It kills innovation. We're going to run into this again. So I'm trying to find. We need to figure out a way to make it to either frame it differently, and I do think, and I like very much what you're saying is that there are examples where this works. The problem is the United States is a different country. The problem is there is a different ethos. There is a different mentality, and part of that mentality is very good. Part of it works. Part of it doesn't work. Right. So that's where we have to figure out.
The way to do that, which is quite easy, is to say we agree on the goal, we disagree on the strategy. Right?
That's right.
Like none of us, and this was to Eldar's point, like many of these same people who are scared of taxation are then happy to be tithed by their church, right?
Absolutely.
And to give to the deserving poor. So the question is, we agree on the goal, right? This is not a good system. It's not the system that we want. We don't like it. It doesn't fit with our values, whether they be Christian or liberal or whatever, or humanist or whatever it may be. And then what strategy works? And by the way, we don't even have to agree on the strategy. We can all try out different strategies and have competing strategies and then see what works.
Idea sex?
Put
them all together. You're right.
Yeah, put them all together.
No, I think you're absolutely right. That's exactly right. Let's have an idea orgy. And it's true. It's not just one book, one idea, one person doesn't have all the answers. I think you're right. There's a multi-pronged approach to this issue. But raising awareness, raising the understanding that payday loans are probably not the best way to deal with a major problem, which is the problem of scarcity. There are better ways to organize our society. And
I appreciate this. I mean, I totally agree with you that we can discuss a lot about how to arrange taxation, whether it's wise, whether it should be done otherwise. I come at it from the behavioral perspective, and what I'm pretty sure of at this point, and I think many researchers and many others agree, is if you take a person, you can get them to perform a lot more competently and impressively and well if you're given the right environment and if you're given the wrong environment. And so when you see people performing badly, one thing you need to worry about is, are we putting them in an environment that's just not conducive? And instead of being mad at them and punishing them, can we do something, and we won't talk about who pays for it, to simply give them an environment that's more conducive to good behavior, to impressive performance. And at that level, I think, again, forget how we do the taxation, but clearly if the poor were less poor, they'd be much more impressive.
There does seem to be a through line, and there does seem to be a through line for us, for Hunter and I, as we speak to people like yourself, who've really taken the time to study this and done a lot of slow thinking around these very important issues and written books. There does seem to be the one idea, I think, that wins the day is the democratic one. The idea that if you give people their own autonomy, the ability to make their own hours, the ability to sort of express their own ideas, even if those ideas are wrong, if there's a safer space to do that, so that they can try to solve their own problems and the problems of the company. And then, of course, coupling that with the idea that there has to be a certain level of creature comfort, enough food, enough time, enough money, so that you can keep your body at homeostasis. There's a homeostasis involved. There's sort of an ability to sort of like feel balanced, and those are very important things to launch from. If you don't have enough, just one example, if you just don't have enough sleep, it's going to radically change the decisions you make. And so we have to know that that's a very bad idea. When John McCain there was a major blunder and a bunch of people were killed on an aircraft carrier. I can't remember what it was, but it was in the Navy. And they found that a lot of these sailors were working 100-hour weeks. And John McCain said, is it true that a lot of the seamen are working 100-hour weeks? And the commander said, I think it was the admiral, said, I can't deny that, Senator. We're doing a study on that. And John McCain said, well, all due respect, if they're working 100 hours in a week, I don't think we need a study. You guys have some bad ideas floating around that ship. Yep. And it's not a macho thing to sleep 2 hours a night for a week on end. Why don't we get them some more goddamn sleep? Because that's how the human machine works, right? So there are certain things that we need to be responsive to the evidence. And I think that one of the things that I like that your book and your thinking has contributed is the fact that there are certain truisms, there are certain inarguable facts. If you take a look at how the human machine works, we need to, it behooves all of us, if you're interested in productivity, if you're interested in wealth, if you're interested in all the goodies, including democracy, it might help if people have that dignity, have the ability to at least clean themselves, house themselves, all that stuff. The question is, how do you get there? The question is, how do you talk about it without triggering people?
Yeah, and I think
shutting them down.
That's, to be honest, because my father is Dutch, and there is, for the Dutch, the big historical preoccupation is being flooded. Right. So there is a real sense that listen, we're all in one boat here. If we don't fix our shit collectively, we all fucking drown. So there's
Israelis are that way too. Israelis are a little bit. You don't have really time to be wishy-washy about things. I've always gotten a kick out of Israelis because it's either yes or no. There's not a lot of subtle nuance. Not like, no, I would have to say, no, I don't like it. No, it's gorgeous. It's very nice, but I don't like this. Yes, for you, but not for me. No, it doesn't make sense. It's fantastic. It's the way it is. It's you don't have a luxury otherwise. To be diplomatic in that sense.
Yeah, and the point is that Americans don't necessarily have that clarity. You live in this giant country. It's the land of opportunity. And getting that sense of clarity on the ways in which...
Well, a sense of balance. Yeah. I don't know why Americans have to swing from one extreme to the other. Hollywood's such a classic example of it. They're standing and fucking clapping for Roman Polanski 1 minute, and then they're all wearing black the next. And then before that, it was the Oscars so white, and then before that, it's global warming, and we just swing from one extreme to another, and I feel like we have a really hard time kind of sticking to the middle and staying somewhat anchored. I don't know why Americans have such a problem. Do you have an idea on that? Do you have any insight on that?
You know, there's really beautiful work on how the metrics you use change what people do. So, you know, if you count the performance of police forces by the number of cases closed, they're very careful not to open cases that are going to be very hard to close. It changes what people do. I think Hollywood, you've created a population that has one job, which is to be liked. So they do what requires to be liked that week. And if next week we want something else, they'll do that to be liked.
So true.
It's very unappealing for somebody in Hollywood to annoy the nation. So
you're right.
That's going to see.
You're right.
Of course, there is the occasional.
They want to be liked by each other. They want to be in that business. If you don't toe the status quo, if you don't toe the line, you don't work. You know.
But then on top of that, you take that culture and its psychology and you give them all this awe, all this celebrity, all this power. And then what ends up happening is that a lot of the rest of the country ends up blind copying that. And then you have another part of the country who doesn't connect with that at all and is like, fuck Hollywood. But I think the other thing too is, you know, what Eldar was talking about is that a lot of it is just helping people in terms of not just thinking about their narrow self-interest, but thinking about their self-interest broadly and how, oh, it might make sense for me as McDonald's because it's convenient for me to just sort of push out the schedule 50 minutes before they're supposed to work. But how am I fucking myself by not giving people the schedule 2 weeks in advance? And this goes into, you know, we had Richard Nisbett on the podcast who did all the work on atomism and holism. And so much of the American mindset, what Bryan is talking about, is that extreme atomism. It's this very, very individualistic, you know, single variable explanations. And, you know, the dots are not connected into a cohesive worldview. And a lot of what we're doing here with mixed martial arts is helping people round out that worldview and develop a more cohesive worldview. So there is that balance.
It sounds smart. Yeah.
Well, we appreciate your time, Professor. This is so great.
Thank you.
The book's very important, and I look forward to blasting it out on my very popular Instagram page. I hope.
Me too.
I hope you're getting real readership because you're a gem. Are you working on what's the next thing for you?
You know, in that area, other studies.
Good.
A lot of what we do is not in book form, but we'll see.
What's the name? What's the name of your class that you teach at Princeton?
I teach decision making and judgment is my big class.
Decision making and judgment.
Well, poverty is only a part. It's more about, you know.
Are you? Do you find? And I don't want to get you in hot water here, but do you find that there is a real echo chamber at Princeton? Is it a really liberal, sort of tyrannical place where you can't express other ideas?
I do not find that. You know, there's obviously sensitivity in the media these days, but I think I don't feel it. And no, I don't think it's that liberal. You know, 50% of our graduates go into investment banking, so we're not exactly creating a communist commune here.
Yeah, it's not where the Communist Manifesto is handed out on a regular basis.
Probably not.
Well, Professor, thanks so much, man. You do good
luck,
work.
guys.
We really appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It was awesome.